This happened to me about 3 months ago. A bit of background about myself. I suffer from chronic pain from a back injury that has been operated on 3 times. Most of the time, I deal with it and live my life, but every few years, it really gets to me. I go into these bad states of depression, and I stop talking to my family and generally turn into a hermit. When this happens, my family gets very worried that I'm going to hurt myself. I have no idea why. I have never made an attempt or even said that I was planning to. They sent me to a psych ER, at which point they usually put me on a 5150. For those who don't know, that means a 3-day hold. They send me off to the local psych ward. None of this has really bothered me before. I have good insurance, so the place they send me is basically like a hotel where you can't have shoelaces. When they wheel you in is the worst part, and if you're admitted in the middle of the day, like I was, you're wheeled right through the day room where all the other patients stare at you coming in. This might be a good time to describe myself. I'm a male, just a bit over 6 feet 2 inches, around 285 pounds, with tattoos covering both arms. And since I have been depressed for months, my beard and hair were out of control at this point, and I looked like a generic biker. So generally, I don't ever have a problem with people trying to mess with me. I'm a very friendly guy, but unless you know me, I don't look like it. As I have been through this a couple of times before, I know the gist of what's going to happen. They take all my info, make sure that I have no laces or anything with strings, and they then show me to my room. This likely word is co-ed, but roommates can only be the same sex. It's also low security, meaning everyone in here is supposedly non-violent. My only problem with this place is that they have people like me with no history of mental illness who are just going through a hard time mixed in with all different levels of patients. But in the last 2 visits here, I've never had a problem with anyone, and I was hoping that I would just do my 3 days and be done. They send me to my room, and the nurse says that my roommate's name is Tim. She also starts to say something along the lines of, "Tim is a really nice guy," which, of course, made me a bit weary, but we're in a psych ward. Everyone in here has some issues. These rooms are basically like any crappy motel, except maybe a bit bigger. There are 2 beds, a bathroom, which annoyingly doesn't have a full door, 1 desk, and each patient gets their own dresser. It's 3 p.m., and Tim is sound asleep. Which isn't that weird since everyone is on different medications that knock them out or make them just have weird sleep habits. So I don't think anything of it. As a matter of fact, after spending hours in the ER and a couple more getting all signed in, I'm dead tired myself and I decided to fall asleep, which I do almost instantly. I have no idea how long I slept for, but when I wake up, it's pitch black outside, and only the small floor light that you can't turn off is giving the room some illumination. Tim is wide awake and sitting up on his bed. "What's up, man?" "I'm Brian." I would have said hi earlier. "But you were sleeping," I said. "Didn't they say his name was Tim?" I was trying to be as friendly as possible since it's just easier to get along with everyone in places like this. "Yeah, earlier, I was a bit tired too. I try to sleep as much as possible so I don't have to interact with any of the demons," Tim replied. This should have been a giant red flag in my eyes to ask for a different room, but Tim was much smaller than me. And they search you when you first come in, so I had no reason to fear him. And I decided to make conversation with him about these demons, which I found out to him were all the nurses and doctors. After talking to him about this, I told him that I was still very tired and needed some more sleep. Okay, and it's really nice to finally have a fellow human as a roommate, Tim said. I took this as a sign that he was okay with me and that I didn't have to sleep with one eye open. I woke up early the next morning for breakfast since I hadn't eaten in 24 hours. After I sat down, Tim came out and sat next to me. Aside from referring to the nurses and doctors as demons, he seemed pretty normal. We chatted about normal things for a while until he suddenly stopped talking and began staring at someone behind me. You see her? That's Jessica. She's an angel, Tim said. I turned around to see a very attractive girl who looked to be in her early 20s, maybe even 18 or 19. She waved and said hello to Tim and everyone else who was sitting in the dining room area. She was one of those social butterflies who goes out of their way to be super nice to everyone. When I looked back, I noticed that he was staring at her a bit too much, and I snapped my fingers. Hey, man, don't freak her out, I told him. He gave me a very confused look, like I had said the most absurd thing in the world to him, and he got very quiet after that. Honestly, I didn't think much of it, as I had my own issues to deal with. The rest of the day was the usual in a place like this. You have to go to meetings, talk to your doctor, take your medication, but the majority of the time, you're just bored out of your mind. The TV gets like 4 channels, and even if one of them was HBO, it was hit or miss. So I spent the majority of the time reading books in the day room. While I'm reading a book, Jessica comes up to me, introduces herself, and begins asking me all kinds of questions about my tattoos. While I'm reading the story of my life, like me, she was basically a normal person having a hard time. She just had bad anxiety problems that caused her to have panic attacks, mainly since she had just started college and couldn't really deal with the pressure too well. We ended up talking for a couple of hours, and I didn't even think about it until after, but Tim was walking past us over and over. A lot of people did laps in this place to pass the time, so I didn't really think much of it. I later learned he was basically staring a hole through the back of my head the entire time. After talking to Jessica for a while, I tell her that I'm going to go take a shower before dinner, and we'll catch up later. As I said before, the bathrooms in this place only have half doors. Picture those old Western saloon doors. So when I'm done, I can see Tim's legs under the door. What's up, man? Do you need to use the bathroom? I'll be just a minute. I got to change, I said. He doesn't say anything and just stands there. You're starting to freak me out a bit. I can hear him breathing heavily, and these doors don't lock, so he could have just pushed it open if he wanted to. Dude, you need to back up because I need to get out, I said. He then began shouting at me, "You're Satan. You're Lucifer," over and over. I am now full-blown freaking out at this point. If I open the door and beat the hell out of this guy, it's going to be me who gets shot in the ass and put into the quiet room. But I don't know what else to do. Even though he's screaming as loud as he can, no nurses seem to be coming. The doors to the bedroom in this place are very thick. I'm pretty sure it's because if some of the patients scream in the night, they don't want the other patients being woken up, which is a pretty nice policy, but it put me into a bind at the moment. After what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably closer to 1, he stops and leaves the room. I get dressed and instantly go find a nurse to tell them what just happened. I have no idea what they said to him, but they immediately put me into a different room. I don't see him at all for the rest of the night, but I'm legit freaked out. No one has ever screamed at me or cornered me like that before, and I couldn't sleep at all that night. Since they don't have clocks, I have no idea what time it is when I hear him from the day room where the nurse's station is. Where is he? Why isn't he coming back to sleep? It was the same tone he was using when he was screaming at me in the bathroom. I cracked the door just a bit so I could hear the nurse talking to him. You'll see him in the daytime, and you can talk to him then. Now go back to bed, the nurse said. This goes on for another 30 seconds before security finally gets there, and I hear a scuffle. But there was no way in hell I was going out there to see what was going on. I can still hear him yelling, but I couldn't make out what he was saying, and it eventually starts to fade. I figured that he was escorted to the quiet room, which was on the opposite side of the ward. Needless to say, even with him in the quiet room, I lay awake the entire night. Morning came, and my doctor is already there, which I found very strange. I usually only saw him well after dinner time. He calls me into the interview room to talk to me. He basically asks me about all the interactions I've had with Tim. I go over everything, and when I'm done, he tells me that I no longer have to worry about Tim because he's been transferred to a different hospital. I have lived around here my entire life, so I actually knew about the hospital he was sent to. And it's pretty hardcore. It's the kind of place where they lock you into a room most of the day. I felt kind of bad because I knew he thought I was trying to steal his angel and was just angry with me over a misunderstanding. But whatever, it's also nice to know that I'm not going to have to hit some poor guy in the face for creeping me the hell out. I finished my stay, and I actually felt a lot better about everything. My pain is being managed better, and I'm ready to stop being such a hermit. My grandmother comes and picks me up, and I think that we're ready to leave, but the doctor is there again very early. And my grandmother is giving me a look that has me a bit worried. I thought that they were going to make me stay longer. Once again, I was brought to the interview room. This is where they tell me what really happened that night, which they didn't want me knowing until I completed my treatment. That night, Tim came out over and over again, asking the nurse when I was coming back. The nurse just kept telling him that he would see me in the morning and did not tell him that I had switched rooms. Apparently, this went on for hours before he finally started screaming about it. Security came, and he was moved to the quiet room and given a shot to incapacitate him. The nurse got in touch with Tim's doctor and told him about the situation. Tim's doctor suggested that he be moved to the medium security wing upstairs until I left. When they went to gather Tim's belongings, they found a 7-inch piece of metal that he had broken off from a table in the TV room. That room has cameras and also has windows where you can see the nurse's station. So my guess is he waited until they weren't looking, worked on it until he broke it off. I'm 99.99% certain that me asking to change rooms is what saved me from being stabbed to death while I was sleeping. The doctors agreed, which is why he was sent to that other hospital. Since he never actually attacked me, he wasn't charged with a crime, and I have no idea how long he was held for. But I'll be a happy man if I never run into him ever again. For context, I'm a 20-year-old female, and at the time of these events, I was around 12 to 13. So, I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my home was so small it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres, my childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and two neighbors. One of my neighbors, called Tay, had been living across near my family for as long as I can remember. He rented out a trailer he owned, which was inhabited by the fourth neighbor. His name was Jay. Jay and his girlfriend, Alice, had moved in a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them but hadn't interacted with them directly. The day I met Jay and Alice was extremely awkward. I was a kid and didn't really want to talk to them. But my grandmother had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables she'd grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandmother had knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad, but I'm not judging. I now know both of them were addicted to meth. My grandmother started the conversation, and I tried to be polite, as I was raised to be, by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry or both. Not the creepiest off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough. And I brushed off the stare as just him trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him, as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He'd ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours, while my brother and I played catch in the yard. Then he began to go to church with me, my brother, and my grandparents. He made sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle so I wasn't right next to Jay, he'd throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then he began coming to my grandmother's house when she'd have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me in various subjects. What really scared me was that I had begun to see him walking near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me, tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf, tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball, tried to get me to go with him and Alice to the movies, and none of these things ever included my brother, only me. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard. And he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road, again staring at me like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was always just off with them. But that day I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up to him and launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet from me. She tore into his arm, and I saw blood. I screamed, and my mom ran out shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to hold onto the dog's collar, she started yelling at him, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandmother ended up driving him to the hospital as Jay and Alice didn't have a car, and I later learned he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since, and I'm still terrified to this day to run into him again. The event in question happened during my sophomore year in college back in 2012. I honestly can't remember the exact month, but I believe it was sometime during the winter. At the time, I lived with two roommates, Katie and Danielle, and we were the best buds of all time. We had just moved into our first off-campus house, and we were reveling in the freedom of being out of the dorms. With this turn of events came some experimentation with drugs and alcohol. The three of us began hanging out and partying with a group of people who eventually got into harder drugs like cocaine and Molly, etc. Katie and I decided after a while that all of this partying was jeopardizing our health and our schoolwork. so we backed off on the drugs. Danielle, however, decided to continue experimenting and became more aggressive. I should note that I hold no judgment toward drug use whatsoever, but I include it because I believe it may be a crucial component of the events that followed. The saga started on a weekend. We all decided to go to a party one night and got separated from each other. I had made arrangements to leave the party early, so Danielle agreed to walk with Katie back to the house. We were always adamant about the buddy system at night. However, on that night, it failed. Danielle left the party with someone, leaving Katie to walk home by herself. She was unfortunately followed by a strange man. To this day, I deeply regret leaving that night, but I've come to terms with my past decision. I came home the next morning. Katie filled me in on the previous night. She was very upset, which was out of character for her. She told me that she had texted Danielle at some point during the night, telling her that she was very bummed out about having to walk home alone. Katie was frustrated, and her text was blunt. But Katie and I just figured that Danielle would either brush it off or apologize, and things would move on. That did not happen. Danielle flipped out and became completely enraged. She responded very defensively and told Katie, in very colorful terms, to basically off and get over it. We thought it was pretty odd and hostile, but tried to just carry on with our lives and not overthink it. It was a Monday, so Katie left the house to go to work on campus, and I went to my afternoon lecture. Sometime while I was in class, Danielle came into Katie's workplace at the student center and began screaming at her in front of 60+ patrons, calling her all kinds of obscenities. She was escorted out of the building by security and somehow made her way back to our house. I should also note that Danielle's mother was visiting this week and was with her the entire time. I believe she was terrified of her daughter, which is why she never intervened. By the time she arrived at home, I had returned from class and was making food in the kitchen. At this juncture, Danielle's rage was centered on Katie, not me. I tried to let the two of them work it out without my intervention, but Danielle cornered me in the kitchen and told me how angry she was with Katie. I had never seen rage in someone's eyes like that. I refused to engage with her and retreated to my room in the back of the house. I sat on my bed and took some deep breaths. That's when I heard Katie coming up the side yard. She was crying on the phone with her mom, telling her what had just taken place at work. I immediately felt this horrible pit in my stomach as I knew they were about to confront each other again. The door opened and Katie walked in. I was still in my room when I heard them start yelling at each other. Katie stood up for herself, telling Danielle that she was way out of line, and Danielle retorted with more obscenities. The yelling turned into full-on screaming, and I had finally had enough, so I went into the living room where they were arguing. Danielle's mom was there as well. I told Danny to knock it off and leave, to which she told me to go myself. This gave Katie time to try to bolt into her room, but Danielle followed her and slammed Katie's hand in the door as she was trying to barricade herself. Things had gotten way out of hand. I went outside on our front porch, and Katie followed me outside a few seconds later. We heard Danny's mom screaming for her to put something down. We looked at each other in terror. I told Katie to run away and to call 911. At that moment, Danny flung open the front door, holding a giant kitchen knife raised above her head and screaming at the top of her lungs at Katie, saying that she was going to kill her. By this time, all of her neighbors were standing outside trying to figure out what the hell was going on. I'm not a very confrontational person, but like hell was I going to let someone kill my best friend? So in a split-second decision, I lunged at Danny and somehow managed to get the knife away from her and threw it on the front lawn. I ran to grab it, at which time Danny had gone back inside to grab another knife. This time, she turned it on herself and asked me if I wanted to watch her end it all. Something had gone terribly wrong with Danielle. Her mother was hysterical by this point, and I kept pleading for her to stop. I then blacked out. When I came to, I was running down the street with Katie. We soon took refuge at our neighbor's house. All the while, we could still hear Danielle's blood-curdling screams down the street. We were totally shell-shocked but grateful to our neighbors for helping us out until the police came. We saw the cops show up a short time later, along with a crisis unit. They detained Danny and drove her to the hospital for a psychiatric evaluation. Katie and I never saw Danielle again, and we stayed with some mutual friends for a couple of weeks before returning to that house. We moved out at the end of that year as the place harbored too many bad memories for us. I later learned that Danielle had experienced a psychotic break triggered by a variety of factors, including stress, drug use, and an underlying mental health condition. This was a huge eye-opener for me to further educate myself about mental health in young adults, as well as appreciate the incredible things your body can do while you're in fight or flight mode. It also taught me a lesson to trust my gut more, as my spotty senses had warned me about Danielle before, but I ignored it. Before we begin, I want to let everyone know that this is a true story. Not a single detail has been fabricated. During my first year of middle school, I developed a bit of a reputation as a wild child. And I've had several run-ins with our school's resource officer. One day, while I was at home watching TV in the living room with my sister, someone rang the doorbell. This startled my younger sister because our parents weren't home. I was the oldest of 4 children, and despite my rebellious nature, I was still the big sister. I wasn't too worried about someone at our door because I figured it was probably the mailman or one of those annoying solicitors. Or perhaps it was our neighbor checking in on us. I went to the door and politely asked, "Who is it?" A man's voice responded, "Open up, it's the police." By the way, our door had no peephole. That's a whole other story. But I could tell there was something off about this man's voice. It seemed cold and detached. I turned to my sister. "I don't know if this guy's really a cop. Go upstairs and check on Jason and Ashley. I'll handle this." She darted up the stairs. The guy on the other side of the door began asking for somebody by name, claiming that they lived there. I said, "I think you got the wrong place. No one by that name lives here." He responded, "Well, I have a warrant that says otherwise." "Are you lying to me, young lady?" I replied, "No, the guy you're looking for doesn't live here." Then he asked, "Then who just ran up the stairs?" This immediately creeped me out. There was a long window by the front door with a thick frosted layering, making it hard to see inside from the outside. I automatically felt threatened. Whoever this man was had crossed into creep territory, so now I was going to be a jerk. I said, "It was my sister, and she's obviously not the grown man you're looking for." "Why did she run?" He responded, "Because you're a weirdo." I replied, "Excuse me, you don't talk to a police officer like that." The way he said that sounded like he was becoming annoyed, like I should just trust him on his word alone. I retorted, "Well, if you're a cop, you're not a very good one because you're at the wrong address. And how do I even know that you are a cop? You should just open the door and see for yourself." That's when I saw my sister peeking around the corner at the top of the steps. "Get back," I whispered. We rarely got people at our door when my parents weren't home, but it's not impossible. I had this habit of locking the screen door. It was very strong for a screen door, and to clarify, it was one of those screen doors directly outside of the front door. Our front porch was open. I figured I would take the risk and open the door just to see if this man was really a cop. When I opened up, the man on the porch did look like a cop. His hand was on his gun, and he kept looking behind me as if he was searching for something. His behavior made me trust him even less. He began grilling me about my sister, trying to catch me in a lie. I said, "Okay, so who really ran up those stairs?" "It was my sister." "I already told you." He asked, "How do I know it's your sister or not the person I'm looking for?" I replied, "Look, you have the wrong address." The man glared at me through his aviators. It was hard to see his face because of how big they were. It was like he was trying to hide his face. I know it's a silly thought for a kid, but my mom and I watched tons of true crime shows together. I know it was stupid to open the door, but I had this sinking feeling that he knew that we were alone. Up to this point, he did not ask for my parents, not even once. I just wanted to keep him in sight because I knew my parents would be home soon. The cop explained to me that the man he was looking for lived at our house. And according to his paperwork, this was still his current address. I informed the cop that we had been living here for a few years now, and I knew for a fact the woman before us lived here alone. This frustrated him, and he informed me in a demanding tone that he was going to check the house himself. I said, "No, you're not, young lady. You're interfering with police business. Now open up the door before you get in trouble." I replied, "I'm not stupid. I know that you need special court papers to come inside." I was in a stubborn mood, and nobody wins against me when I'm in a stubborn mood, unless, of course, you're my parents, cop or not. This man wasn't coming inside the house or going anywhere near my siblings. That's when he demanded to speak to my parents for the first time. He asked, "Where are your parents?" "I want to speak to them about your behavior." He was trying to use the "get me into trouble" tactic to frighten me. In reality, my mom was far scarier than him. He would have been afraid of my mom because she's the type to kick someone's ass and then ask questions later. But she doesn't play around when it comes to her kids. She wouldn't assault or threaten a police officer, but he would have been in for it because my mom would have unleashed a verbal onslaught, full-blown Karen mode, level 10. I replied, "My parents aren't here right now. They're at the grocery store." I had a feeling that he already knew my parents weren't home. Up until then, he hadn't asked for them. I didn't know if he was a cop or not, but I didn't want to aggravate him further by telling him a lie. I know that my behavior was annoying, but I wasn't going to give him a reason to call me a liar. That's when he reached for the screen door and tried to open it. "Open the damn door," he said. I replied, "No," and then slammed the door shut so he couldn't ask me again. I snuck halfway up the stairs and listened. He began yanking and tugging on the screen door, saying, "Little, I should arrest you and teach you a lesson." After that, he just walked through our neighbor's yard like nothing happened. That's when I realized I never saw any cop cars in our driveway. We lived in townhomes, so I could see all the vehicles from a distance, and I didn't spot a single cruiser parked nearby. My parents showed up almost right after he left. I told my mom what happened. She said, "Well, you shouldn't have opened the door, and you should have called me right away. What's the matter with you? You're grounded now. Come help me with the groceries." I couldn't help but notice that our neighbors checked on us far more often after this incident, and our parents got us a babysitter whenever they left the house without us. I'm not 100% sure, but something tells me that the man who came to the house wasn't a cop, and I would have put my family in danger by allowing him inside. To everyone listening, teach your kids that a uniform is just not enough. You should ask for their badge number and call the police station to verify if you can. It also doesn't hurt to invest in a strong, sturdy screen door. I'm a 17-year-old female, but this happened when I was 13. I was known as the quiet kid in school. We never said much in class. But since I was a paranoid person, I would always carry a weapon with me. I had a needle tool in my pencil case, but when I was outside of school, I would carry it in my pocket. It was used for making clay sculptures. If you don't know what it is, it's essentially a 2-inch metal spike with a wooden handle. In other words, it can be used as a shank. I went to a Catholic school on the outskirts of town, and every Friday or half day, most students would walk into town to go to Starbucks or Jerry's Post Road Market. I would usually grab a bag of chips and an Arizona iced tea from Jerry's. All the girls would walk together in one gigantic flock, but since I was a loner, I would always end up walking by myself. I had 2 other friends that I would usually go with, but they left that school a year earlier. The day this incident happened to me, it began like any other Friday. During dismissal, they would call all the walkers down in alphabetical order after the car riders and boozers were in their zones. After they dismissed the walkers, I went to the cafeteria bathroom to change out of my uniform since it was May, and the weather was really warm. I brought a pair of shorts and a t-shirt to wear. I put the clay tool in my shorts pocket after I was done changing. Most of the walkers had already left the school. However, the walkers from the nearby high school, which my brother attended, had just been dismissed. Since there were usually a lot of them, they would be clogging the sidewalks. The route that I usually took to Jerry's was to walk all the way through town, which was maybe a mile long. But since it was so crowded, I decided that I would walk through a jogging trail in the woods that began behind a church. For the first couple of minutes, everything was fine. I saw a lot of rabbits and even a family of deer in the woods. Eventually, I heard footsteps followed by muffled laughter coming from behind me. When I turned around, I saw a group of older boys from the high school. I knew them because they were friends with my brother, but he wasn't there that day. He was in Manhattan for my grandfather's 78th birthday. I couldn't go because I wasn't allowed to skip school. The first guy's name was Nick. He had long blonde hair and always wore a Beatles t-shirt. The second was Blake. He was a ginger who really liked screaming my name at the top of his lungs whenever he would see me in public. The last guy was John. He had light brown messy hair and was known as the dangerous guy who was always accepting dares no matter how crazy. When they spotted me, Nick called out, "Hey, you ready to have a bad day?" I began to pick up my pace. "Hey, don't walk away from us," I heard Nick say. They then began running towards me, so I turned around again. They had caught up to me and were now right behind me. Blake then blew into the buckle on his backpack, and it made this high-pitched whistling noise. He then said, "Be careful now. We all know what that noise means." I was confused and asked, "What's that?" All 3 began laughing hysterically. "It's the rape whistle." They then pushed me down into the brook that ran along the path, getting my backpack all wet. That really made me mad because now all my homework was soaked. So I picked up a rock from the ground and threw it at John, which hit him in the head. He then took off his backpack, jumped into the brook, and dunked my face into the freezing cold water. I was about to scream, but I then realized I would just be wasting the limited amount of oxygen I had. Then I remembered the clay tool was still in my pocket, so I grabbed it, managed to get away from John, and stabbed him in the hand as he was coming towards me again. He screamed and quickly grabbed his injured hand. I quickly got out of the brook, but then Blake and Nick pushed me against this giant willow tree and wrenched the clay tool out of my hand as they had me pinned against the trunk. John climbed out of the brook and joined us. He then said, "You thought we were joking about the whistle, didn't you?" My heart skipped a beat. I began kicking and screaming, but no one could hear me because we were out of earshot of everyone on the street or the sidewalk. We then heard shouting coming from the end of the trail. Everyone looked up and saw two joggers, a couple in their mid-20s. Nick, John, and Blake ran from the scene, leaving their bags by the tree, while the two joggers ran up to me. I'll call them Mary and Joe. By the time they got to me, I was in the fetal position on the ground, bawling my eyes out. Mary comforted me while Joe called the police. Nick, John, and Blake were caught soon after. I don't know what happened to them after this incident. I never walked into town alone again since I still prefer to be by myself. I trail behind the flock of girls whenever school lets out. My house is a 10-minute walk from town, and since one of my classmates is my neighbor, we would usually walk home together so that I would never be alone. I want to sincerely thank those two joggers for saving me that day. The world could use more people like them. But to the three who tried to have their way with me, you guys can go to hell. There's always a reason to be afraid. I joined Reddit pretty much to tell this story. I've told the story to my roommates, and I've talked about it a few times with some other people who were there, but that's it. I don't even like to talk about it because inevitably someone will say, "Really? We should go try and find it again," and I really don't want to. I've looked for it on a map a few times, but I can't find it through Google's aerial maps. Anyway, I'm originally from a major city in southern Ohio, and outside of town, there are a number of smaller townships. One of these is known as the more country bumpkin redneck grit part of town. It's not even in the same county, but is part of the general area my city is, though. In the woods, there's this legend of Hell's Church, supposedly an old church that burned down where Satanists do rituals now. Or a Satanist church that burned down by a ritual, depending on who you ask. There are a number of house church myths in Ohio in many different places, but this one was closest to us. And a number of my guy friends decided they wanted to be ghost hunters and check out haunted places around where we lived. We were juniors in high school, and while all of us obviously thought this was just stupid, we thought it was funny to go out and scare ourselves. Plus, more people had cars or driver's licenses by now, so we were enjoying a new burst of freedom. I'm a scaredy cat about most stuff like this. But I was the most tomboyish girl in the group and always kind of wanted to be able to hang out with the guys. Plus, some of the girls in the group were going, so I didn't want to look like a loser. So, one day in November, we decided we're going to go out one night and try to find this church. We'd actually been to this location once before that fall, but one of my friends had a curfew. So after exploring an old barn and the railroad tracks on a bridge nearby, we left. We hadn't found the church, to our disappointment and my mild relief. We took cars out there, going past more popular parts of our city and back to this woodsy area. I can't honestly tell you how we got out there, but I know it's off of a state highway, then an abandoned access road past some old warehouse, and then down a dirt road. Once you get down the dirt road, there's kind of a thicker part of the road early on, where we parked our cars off the shoulder. We did this because the road thins out and becomes impossible to drive down. And also someone clearly owns this land. Further down the road, there's some no trespassing signage. I'm sure a ton of kids come back here, so it didn't seem odd to me that they wanted to block this place off. I barely thought twice about it at the time. We get out of our cars and start walking down the dirt road, wandering off the path from time to time to check out barns or clearings where we thought the chimney might be. At first, it was just scary because it was dark and old or whatever, but then the barns started to get weirder. Like they were filled with weird spray painting symbols, but that's not what bothered us. But also, other stuff like dead owls that looked like they'd been opened up and other bits that looked like they might have come from animals. I was grossed out, but we all kind of agreed that these probably came from the same teenagers trying to fake a satanic ritual, or that the animals got trapped in the falling apart barn and died in there. My friends are now hardcore trying to find this stupid chimney, so they keep taking off through the trees into the clearings. Myself and the other two girls who were there kind of hang back on the tree line. For most of them, getting a little more nervous and a little irritated with all the coming up empty. As we keep going, we find a bike on the tree line, like a bike that maybe a 12-year-old would ride. That's a little creepy, but fine, whatever. It probably belonged to someone who owned the land. We decide we're going to go a little further, and soon enough, we find another bike. This one is older, a little rusted, but still undersized. We didn't talk too much about the other bike, just kind of mumbling that it's probably still nothing. One or two of the four guys who were there are kind of trying to turn it up, saying these kids probably got murdered or stuff like that, but no one is really having it. By this point, we've been here for about 2 hours, and it's getting really late. Plus, I think we were all a little more creeped out than we wanted to admit. We decide to head back to the cars, and I'm feeling relieved, happy to be headed back to my house and out of here. But things never work out that way, do they? By the cars, we see a road that goes straight up a hill through the trees. At the start of it, there's a big metal gate that had a road closed sign on it, which we had seen before, but for some reason, it never occurred to us to try and go up the road. We had a small debate at the gate about an even split on who wanted to venture up and who didn't. I absolutely didn't, but eventually, we decide we'll go up just to see. Both of the drivers wanted to go, so there's not a lot we can do about it. We climb over the gate and start up the hill, where an old pavement road is cracked and crumbled under our feet, though it was for sure a real asphalt road at some point. In addition to the road condition and the brush being an obstacle, someone had felled a bunch of trees over the path, purposely blocking off the road from any cars. Some of us are starting to seriously question if we should be doing this, arguing that someone obviously wanted to keep us out of here. But we get teased for being afraid and keep going. I couldn't see where the road would end because it was so dark and the trees made it hard to see. Plus, the road was really, really steep, so all you could see was up, with a little moonlight peeking through the trees. All of a sudden, though, we reach the end. The trees just open up, and we've come off of the incline to a flat field, and holy, what a sight it was. It's the flat field with tall prairie grass on either side. The path we are on splits the large clearing we're in down the center and leads through the grass to a cul-de-sac with 3 buildings. 2 look like farmhouses, with 1 barnished building. They were wood, and while they may have been painted at one point, it looked like they've been mostly weathered and stripped by time. I see this, and I am done. I want to leave, but of course, some of my friends say that we have to check out these buildings. At this point, I finally put my foot down. as do the other two girls and one of our guy friends who decided this is enough for him. So, the three guys who want to go into the building tell us just to wait there, and while we don't want to be in this field out in the open, we decide we can't just leave them. At this point, we've turned off our flashlights because the moonlight is so strong. The three of them take off down the little path, and the four of us who remain stand together, bitching about how stupid our friends are and making small talk. None of us say it, but we were all looking into the grass every now and again, worried something's going to jump out. It's just so creepy, this abandoned little settlement. It feels like our friends are gone forever. We see them get into a building and go inside. We can see the flicker of their flashlights in the windows, and I just remember feeling so tense. It was like watching a horror movie in real life. After maybe 10 minutes, we see our guy friend coming towards us, lightly jogging, looking afraid for the first time all night. "You idiots went inside," I said, pissed off at them. One of my friends just looks at us, and I'll never forget it. "It was full of bikes, just bikes chained to the walls," he said. We didn't believe them. We kept waiting for them to say they were kidding, but they insisted. They said it was like they were just storing a bunch of bikes there, most of them smaller. They looked afraid, and as much as I didn't want to believe them, I did. They aren't the type of guys to pull a prank for this long. By then, we can all agree we need to get the heck out of there, and we start down the hill, hurrying the best we can. All of a sudden, about halfway down the field, we can see a car's headlights down the hill, about where our cars are. We see them pass slowly, and we know someone is down there looking for us. Because it's so far off the beaten path, we figure it's one of two things. Number one, the cops, and we're going to be for trespassing. Or number two, the people who own this land or these houses or something, and they're going to call the cops or murder us. We know that this road isn't that long, so they'll be turning around and circling back soon enough, and because our cars are there, they'll probably wait for us. We're all whispering about this as we pick up the pace, speeding down the hill as fast as we can. I'm not a good runner, but I was hauling ass, getting down there as fast as I could, basically hurling over the fallen trees. Once we get down the hill, we don't see any lights, but we know they can't be far away. "Get in the cars," one of our friends yells, and we're fumbling with the doors, like a horror movie, just too nervous to get into the cars. We get in, and just as we start the cars up, we see the headlights speeding down the road, a giant black truck roaring up behind us. The truck seemed larger than life, raising up off the ground. The whole thing was terrifying, but it was extra terrifying because we couldn't see who was driving in the dark, and with the headlights blinding us. We peel out of there, total pedal to the metal. This truck is still following us, bearing down on us as our two cars race out of there. The car is also getting real close to us, threateningly close, almost like it was trying to run us off of the road. We're all screaming, looking back at the truck, fighting for some distance. Once we get to the highway, we're switching lanes, trying to escape. Luckily, we were in sedans, so it was much easier for us to weave in and out of cars. But this truck is still chasing us. We're in two different lanes, but we don't want to get too separated from our friends. The passengers of both cars are texting back and forth, trying to make a plan. It took us about 15 minutes to lose the truck. I'm not sure if the distance was too much or if they turned around, but once we got to a big shopping center area, we ducked off the road and into a Sonic parking lot. We all sat in our cars for a bit, watching to make sure we weren't going to get snuck up on before getting out of the car and ordering some food and talking. Everyone was pretty shaken up. It took us a while to settle down enough to head home. As much as we talked it over, we just couldn't figure out what had happened. Eventually, we all went home during what was a pretty silent car ride, exhaustion and lingering fear taking over. We didn't talk about it again for a long time, and we never called the police, which honestly, as an adult now, I feel like we should have. I don't think about it often, only during the fall, really. But when I do think about it, I ask myself, who chased us? Why was that town abandoned? Who owned those bikes, and where are they now? My name is Alex, and I'm a former soldier of the U.S. Army. I would like to tell my story, not for recognition, but to help people understand that sometimes you are all that stands between life and death. For context, I'm a 5'10", 190-pound male. I served in the Army since I was 18, and I only joined because I was kicked out of my house and was basically homeless. This happened shortly after I left the military. When I left, I had little to no money in my pocket. Like most events, I was screwed out of much of my disability by the VA in compensation for the expenses that soldiers have while being underpaid. I had to find a place to live after I went back home to Florida. To make a long story short, my family scattered all over the state after my mom's death. My sister was now married with kids. By this time, my dad was somewhere on the beach getting drunk with his retirement money, and nobody to this day knows where my brother is, but that's a story for another time. I didn't know where to start. All I knew is that I couldn't go back to being homeless again. I took a cab from the airport to my best friend's house, who I knew from high school. I had no idea if he even lived there anymore, but I didn't really have any other options. I had 2 duffel bags with me, the clothes on my back, and about $500 in my pocket. I think you can imagine when I knocked on his door, my faith in the good Lord was being tested. Thankfully, my friend Nick answered the door. We spent almost 6 to 7 hours just hanging out and walking around his neighborhood, catching up from all the years we have been apart. I hated it with all my being having to ask, but I managed to get it out. Hey Nick, I kind of have nowhere else to go. Would you mind? He cut me off and said, after the first hour you sat on my couch, I accepted the responsibility of giving you a place to sleep. You didn't need to ask, I just knew. I nearly teared up. I stayed with Nick for the next 2 days. He then brought me to a property that he inherited from his grandmother, who passed away. It was a single-story house that was only half completed. I'll describe the setting as best I can. It was an upper-middle-class neighborhood surrounding a large lake. The house was a ranch-style home made of brick that was undergoing remodeling. However, the master bedroom, the bathroom, kitchen, and living room were all finished. The 2 guest bedrooms, the attic, garage, and foyer were all bare bones. We spent about 6 hours cleaning up the place, and I hoped to finish some ongoing projects. After I got settled, we both had the same idea. I would work on the house while looking for a job. It was simple enough, and I was honestly looking forward to it. I was left with food, a list of projects by priority, a key to the shed, which had all the tools, a credit card monitored by Nick for project expenses, and a nice mountain bike that used to belong to Nick's old man, so I had a way to travel around town. I was introduced to the neighbors on both sides of me, who had families of their own and were extremely friendly. On some occasions, the wife of one of the neighbors would bring me leftovers. Her brother was apparently in the Marines, and she knew exactly what I was going through, so she did what she could for me, which is one of the kindest things I've ever experienced in my life. After 3 weeks of job interviews and housing projects, other than a grueling battle with the VA for my disability benefits, things were looking up for me. My neighbor to the right of me, who I will call Travis, greeted me while I was working on the foyer. He told me that he and his wife would be leaving for about a week because a branch of their company was being shut down. He would only be about 4 hours away. He said that their daughter, who I will call Sarah, would be coming in and out of his house because she was working. He just wanted me to keep an eye out on her and his place since she had been caught having parties on more than one occasion. I shook his hand and told him not to worry, and he left the very next day. 4 days went by, and everything was fine. Nick had moved one of his old TVs into my place, so I was catching up on all the movies I had missed. That's when my phone went off. I didn't recognize the number. When I answered it, I was kind of hoping that a family member was reaching out to me. "Hello, Alex, this is Sarah. I need you to come over right now." "Sarah? Travis's daughter? What's wrong?" "Someone has been walking around outside of my house for the last 30 minutes, and they just tried to use the back door to get in." "Are they in the house?" "No, but I think they're searching for some way inside." "I called the police, but I don't know how long it'll be until they get here." "Okay, I understand. Listen to me carefully. Lock yourself in a bathroom. I'm on my way right now." I hung up and ran to the kitchen window and peeked out through the blinds. Sure enough, I caught the sight of a tall, dark figure walking to the backside of Sarah's house. I only got a quick look, but from what I could tell, he was at least to my height with a strong build. I grabbed the keys to the shed and made my way to the backyard. The fence that separated our yards was on the shorter side. I had to crawl so the intruder wouldn't see me. I unlocked the shed and opened the door just enough to squeeze inside. I armed myself with a machete and a hammer as a backup weapon. I left the same way I got in and made my way over to Sarah's house. I was creeping around the side where I had seen the intruder before. I was hoping he would come the same way again so I could surprise him. Just as I was about to round the corner, I heard the glass shatter. I immediately froze. The intruder had smashed the sliding glass door located at the back of the house. I could hear his shoes crunching the glass on the hardwood floor. Being careful not to reveal myself, I peeked around the corner. He was inside and making his way to the other end of the house. He would hear me if I came the same way as him while I was wearing my boots, so I untied my boots before following him. I got a good look at the general floor plan in front of me. There was a living room with the glass all over the floor. Further past that was the kitchen, and to the left was the front door. I looked onto the carpet to avoid the glass and hid behind the couch with the machete in hand. I focused on my breathing and listened. I heard a loud bashing sound, followed by what sounded like Sarah screaming her lungs out. "This is the police. Come out now with your hands up, or you will be shot. He's in here. He needs medical attention." I yelled. In a nutshell, I was put in cuffs until things were squared away. Sarah was let out of the bathroom, and Travis was called right away. It turns out the intruder was the best friend of another guy who Sarah had dated some time ago. Apparently, Sarah recently tested positive for being pregnant. When her ex-boyfriend discovered this, he became furious, so his dumbass best friend got involved. Nothing like throwing her life away over someone else's relationship. The boy was rushed to the ER for the straight-edge kiss I gave him. His face was sliced open from the bottom corner of his chin to the top of his head. I saw him as I entered, and I had the machete raised above my head. About to massacre this guy Jason Voorhees style all over the bedroom. Everything changed once I saw who the intruder was. He was just a kid. He couldn't have been no older than 16. He was a Hispanic male with a ridiculous haircut and mustache. He had a horrified look on his face. I could see the tears swelling up in his eyes. I paused for a moment, and his face went from the brink of crying to a furious scowl. He picked up the hammer and charged at me. He swung and missed. I retaliated by cutting across the intruder's face and was about to impale him through the skull. I then heard shouting from downstairs. "This is the police. Come out now with your hands up, or you will be shot. He's in here. He needs medical attention. I yelled. In a nutshell, I was put in cuffs until things were squared away. Sarah was let out of the bathroom, and Travis was called right away. It turns out the intruder was the best friend of another guy who Sarah had dated some time ago. Apparently, Sarah recently tested positive for being pregnant. When her ex-boyfriend discovered this, he became furious, so his dumbass best friend got involved. Nothing like throwing her life away over someone else's relationship. The boy was rushed to the ER for the straight-edge kiss I gave him. His face was sliced open from the bottom corner of his chin to the top of his head. Sarah apparently got a hold of me because Travis left my number on the fridge. She was told to call me just in case something like this happened. I can't say I feel bad for the kid, though. He earned the giant scar on his face when he decided to rush at me with a hammer. Not exactly the story I wanted to have within the first month of living there. It's been about 3 months. I'm now working for Florida's Department of Agriculture. I still live in the same house, which is only 1 bedroom away from being completed. To everyone listening, never just be a bystander. Someone's life or death can be determined by your actions.
I'm an icon, man. My girl about a 10. I should fuck her in the Benz.